Вітаю, друзі! Черговий брифінг на тему викриття фейків та пропаганди держави-агресора.
Greetings, friends. Another briefing on exposing fakes and propaganda of the aggressor state. We have been waiting for a new fiction for a long time, and here it is. Now Russian propagandists say that Syrian militants are going to fight for Ukraine. This was reported by Russian state TV channels. In particular, Russia Today reports. At the American base at Tanf in Syria, loyal US militants are being trained to be transferred to Ukraine. There is a similar message on Russia 24 with reference to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service headed by Naryshkin, who, as you remember, for a long time could not gather his thoughts during the approval of hostilities against Ukraine. This angered the Russian leader himself. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service reports America is actively recruiting even members of terrorist organizations, including the Islamic State, as mercenaries to participate in the battles in Ukraine. About 60 fighters aged 20-25 are sent for combat training and then transferred to Ukraine, Russia 24 reports. Absolute fiction, but we know that in Russia the more absurd a lie is, the more people will believe it. There are no Islamic State militants on the territory of Ukraine, and there never will be. Meanwhile, the storyline in which Russians involve children to justify their aggressive actions continues. Do you remember the boy Alyosha from the Belgorod region who accompanied Russian soldiers to the fighting in Ukraine? Now a girl named Katya helps him. She is only 6 years old, and all this time she has been living in one of the most shelled areas of Donetsk. The girl continues to enjoy life, and she became one of the faces of Russian propaganda to justify Russia's aggressive actions against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia is trying to develop a line that they were forced to attack Ukraine, because Ukraine was preparing an attack on Russia. Let me remind you that even Putin stated this. Now this opinion is supported by the governor of the Kursk region, Roman Starovoyt. He spoke about a manual found during the special operation of the Russian Federation, confirming that Ukraine was preparing to seize not only the Donetsk People's Republic, but also a couple of Russian regions, including the Kursk region. What is this manual, which according to their logic is carried by Ukrainian soldiers, so that they don't make a mistake and attack the Kursk region specifically? That is, according to their logic, almost 20 years ago Ukraine was preparing to attack the Kursk region. Absolute lies and nonsense. But like all Russian propaganda, it does not rely on historical truth. It relies only on the version that is profitable for them. Russia is also trying to attract foreign names to keep the fire on its lies alive. Now the so-called German journalist Alina Lieb comes in to help them, who is angered by the fact that the German media is writing untruths about Russia's aggressive actions against Ukraine. What is this Alina Lieb famous for? Because she was one of those who gave the rise to a fake story about the alleged murder of a Russian-speaking boy by Ukrainian nationalists on German territory. This fake was thrown through a network of Telegram channels for emigrants. One of the sources of the repost was exactly this Alina Lieb. After this fake had reached an unprecedented scale in Germany itself, the local police was forced to react and issued an official statement that it was a fabrication from the first to the last letter. And how is it without biological laboratories on Ukrainian territory? There is also one of the arguments for Russian propaganda when they justify their aggressive actions towards Ukraine. Now the source of the fake is Putin himself, who mentioned the old story again at a meeting of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. I quote, "We have long been alerted about US military biological activities in the post-Soviet space. Their main task is to collect biological materials and study for their own purpose to specifics of virus proliferation. In the course of the special operation in Ukraine, in fact, documentary evidence was obtained that components of biological weapons were being created close to our borders. What has changed? Now Putin says, in fact. That is, he makes it less likely that it really was a biological weapon, because it has been disproved by everyone, not just Ukrainian or international chemists, but even the Russians, who said that this information was just a lie by Russian propagandists. So he softens his own rhetoric, but continues to spread this fake about biological laboratories and biological weapons, which Ukraine has never developed and will never develop. Russia is also trying to justify its actions to blockade the ports of Odessa. This is when it is impossible to remove the past year's harvest from the territory of Ukraine, thus throwing the whole world into a global crisis and hunger. International leaders and international organizations are already speaking forcefully about this. And now a member of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, an official person, appears on the stage. Lies to the whole world. Worse than Nazism, Maria Zakharova commented on the export of grain from Ukraine to the territory of NATO countries on the air of Russia 24 TV channel. She stressed that for the food they paid to the Kiev regime with money and weapons. This is not neo-Nazism, then they could not come up with such a thing. It's something even scarier, Zakharova said. Terrible is the lie with which she reports this version to the whole world. In fact, it is precisely because of the blockade of ports that the whole world can feel hungry. And the only way to avoid this is to unblock Ukraine in the Black Sea. But instead of doing this, Russia comes up with another nonsense about the alleged export of grain from Ukraine to NATO countries. And this, in turn, is a continuation of another storyline in Russian propaganda. After Russia did not get any tangible results during its military aggression, they began to justify themselves in the eyes of their voters and citizens, saying that in fact they are fighting not with Ukraine but with NATO countries. That's why Russia loses. And now another excuse for Kadyrov. Russia is not opposed to Ukraine but to NATO, Kadyrov said at the New Horizon Marathon. NATO is arming them, their mercenaries are abroad. It's not easy for our state, but it is a good experience. We will prove once again that Russia cannot be defeated. Really very good experience. Almost 30,000 Russians were killed during this war. This is 3 times more than during the 2 Chechen wars. Perhaps Kadyrov can tell more on this topic. As for NATO, in fact, if NATO had stood here, the war would have ended much faster, if only Ukraine received appropriate weapons in order to resist this aggressor. Another fake at the level of a joke. Russian propagandists have made a fake document in the media. This seems to be a letter between the head of presidential office Andriy Yermak and Valery Zaluzhny. But the position of our commander-in-chief is indicated incorrectly. He is called the chief of the general staff of Ukraine. Thus, advice to propagandists from the state of the aggressor: study the correct spelling of officials in Ukraine and then create your fakes. Do not trust the propagandists of the aggressor state, trust the Ukrainian media and the armed forces of Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine!